Ever since it first launched as America's Movable Fighting Man in 1964, followed by its rebranding as a Real American Hero in 1982, through to its resurgence in popularity amongst adult-age collectors during modern times, the G.I. Joe toy line has seen its ebbs and flows throughout the decades. Thus, there was a level of excitement upon fans learning of a 6-inch or 1/12 scale G.I. Joe classified line, which was to be its equivalent to the superhero-based Marvel Legends and Star Wars Black Series action figure lines, both of which had already reached popular status in this same scale. Speaking on a personal level, I had a bit of a mixed reaction myself upon seeing some of the initial figure photographs being circulated on the internet, and heard this similar reaction echoed among my fellow collectors amongst the fandom. Having said that, a change in course and a back-to-basics approach has resulted in a shift from polarizing responses to something resembling a closer to unanimous enjoyment, at least in terms of fan-based feedback as the G.I. Joe classified line evolves. I'm here to talk about where we started, where we're at presently, and the direction we're headed with this retro-based classic toy line. Let's talk about it right here and now. Having long been familiar with the 6-inch action figure range, I admit I even tried to start a small, makeshift, and somewhat ragtag collection of G.I. Joe figures similar to the aforementioned Marvel Legends and Star Wars Black Series. As such, I got the Fortnite Havoc figure as an obvious stand-in for Firefly, and multiple variations of Mattel's WWE Sergeant Slaughter back before we as fans had the option of G.I. Joe Classified. I've said in the past that the 2020 G.I. Joe Classified first wave unveiling was polarizing, and while I did immediately know that I'd be adding Snake Eyes and Destro to my collection, what with their faithful representation to the Real American Hero toy line of my youth, I felt less inclined to do the same with Duke, Scarlet, and Roadblock. I'm aware that Classified was originally based on the existing G.I. Joe media at the time, namely the Operation Blackout video game, and I will give Hasbro some credit for attempting to go in a different direction, because after all, reinvention is a risk required to see if new generations of fans can be reached, and it did work with the transition of the larger 1964 incepted 12-inch Movable Fighting Man to the 3 3/4-inch Real American Hero toy line of 1982. And I will note that this type of reinvention has worked out numerous times before within other toy lines to keep it relevant to the current generation at that particular point in time. However, when a change isn't as unanimously praised as a toy company would hope, the tried and true formula will still generate popularity amongst the existing faithful fan base who crave their childhood heroes in a revised scale and relaunched collectible sub-brand. I do admit it took a bit of time for G.I. Joe Classified to find its footing, and the second wave gave us figures that I felt were okay at best, but when given the chance later on, I still opted for other versions of these same characters when presented with the opportunity. Now, I do think that we saw far better retro likenesses when the next wave, later in 2020, hit stores, though the exclusivity nature to Target made these hard to find initially. That, and we would still see non-military style choices for weapons here and there, similar to what we saw in the earlier waves. That said, as G.I. Joe Classified became a more proven commodity in the action figure space, we saw a bit less in the way of exclusivity, and subsequent waves of figures began hitting more and more retail outlets to the point that some even seemed to warm the pegs for more extended periods of time. I will be upfront and state it, if G.I. Joe Classified could have reinvented itself away from the Real American Hero toy brand that was proven in the 80s and into a manner that resonated with me as a long-term fan and collector, I still would have been open to it. I understand that that is a very subjective measure of criteria, and that some folks did say that they enjoyed the metallic colors and futuristic weaponry. However, like the War for Cybertron and Legacy series, among other modern G1 Transformers figures, and the Masters of the Universe Classics, Origins, and eventual Masterverse line of figures, I wanted to see G.I. Joe rooted in its familiar, tried-and-true, Real American Hero appearances, and that's eventually the direction that we would go. Nowadays, as we see each wave progress, the designs, weapon choices, and color schemes presented to us brings a more organically positive reaction to me and my fellow collectors, at least the ones that I interact with on a day-to-day basis. Seeing timeless favorites such as Roadblock, Flint, Storm Shadow, or Stalker filling our toy shelves in a classic manner with modern detailing and articulation gives us the G.I. Joe toy line that many of us have always wanted to have. Ultimately, it took many months and arguably closer to a year, but eventually we got figures representing our beloved characters in a manner more akin to the original toys and the Sunbow animated cartoon that filled countless hours of our youth. Being someone who enjoyed the X-Men animated series and thus collected Marvel Legends figures that could represent this show, and as someone whose Star Wars Black Series collection serves as a physical, tangible representation of the movies and TV series that I enjoy, the change in course for G.I. Joe is a welcome one for me. Additionally, take note as well that the store-specific retail exclusivity has receded a little bit in terms of us being able to get the classic original versions for each character. These days, what we're seeing is this exclusivity be limited to the sub-team color schemes for these characters, which I have noticed that less of my fellow collectors are actively hunting down, and thus it allows a slightly better chance for those who do want them to be able to get them. Yes, we do see some exclusives on Hasbro Pulse's website, but like they did for Dr. Mindbender, it doesn't seem to be impossible to track down, as this particular figure is an example of something that was released on multiple days in a fashion that would allow more people to be able to place the pre-order. With the current direction, it feels as though the line still has a long ways to go in terms of character selection offerings, and that's a good thing. It's great to have something to look forward to. Also, the possibility of mid to slightly larger vehicles is coming to fruition. Future announcements seem to continue the trend of faithful, classic 1980s character representations, and from what I can tell, the quantity of figures has seemingly risen to the point that it's no longer as frantic of a race to pre-order them and see them sold out right away. Either way, the lineup of characters has gone in a direction that collectors can more readily get behind, and when we look at the figures relative to their vintage counterparts, it seems to drive that optimal balance between giving us the nostalgia that we want, yet keeping up with the high standards already set forth by the other toy lines in this modern era. I know that I haven't mentioned the Snake Eyes movie line of figures, as that's beyond the scope of this particular video, but I am acknowledging it here quickly simply for the sake of completeness, even if I treat it as a separate entity from the main lineup of classified figures that I'm actively collecting. I suppose all of this has served as a visual way of me saying that where we started was a bit of a rocky road with a glimmer of hope, and later on, we ended up on a path that gave us what we always wanted in a modern 6-inch G.I. Joe line. To add to that, the future seems to be giving us more of the same in terms of what collectors are hoping to put onto their display shelves. Now as I look at my own lineup, you'll notice I've gone out of my way to add some Gridiron Studios upgrade kits to selected figures, which adds to the fun of the collection that I am building. What started out as something of a maybe toy line has now blossomed into a must-have G.I. Joe sub-brand, and has now become a talking point amongst the collecting fan base whenever new announcements are made. My general conclusion is that G.I. Joe Classified is now succeeding to give us the equivalent of what Star Wars Black Series and Marvel Legends has done for their respective fan bases in that scale. Further, Classified has also filled that same nostalgia gap driven by the aforementioned modern Transformers and Masters of the Universe releases. I guess what I'm saying is, things look onwards and upwards for the G.I. Joe collectors. Most of you already know this, yet at the same time I felt compelled to talk about it here and illustrate the progression in an easily accessible media format with this upload. I suspect that many of you will agree with what I've said here, but whether you did or didn't, if you still find G.I. Joe Classified has a few things lacking, be it the regular inclusion of figure stands with each release, or more alternate hands for example, do let me know in the comments section of this video. I only ask that you do so courteously and politely, and otherwise, I'm open to hearing from all of you. With that, special thanks to my Patreon supporters and channel members whose names can be found in the description section of this video. If you'd like to see your name down below, visit patreon.com/toyconnections to become a patron and receive some exclusive benefits, or click the join button next to my channel name to become a member and receive some custom badges and emojis for your use in the comment section of any Toy Connections video or live stream. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please click on some of my other content here. Subscribe if you already haven't, press that like button to spread this video to more viewers, and share it with your friends. Otherwise, yo Joe, and I will see you again soon with some more of my favorite toys. Thanks again, and take care.